Get a lot of questions when it comes to how do I eat right and what kind of choices should I make for food, timing, cooking, especially when it's around the decisions. It could be either weight loss, insulin resistance, and some of the diabetes risks, as well as some of the cancer treatments that we know the clinical nutrition and different forms of fasting have been very beneficial for. So I'm going to highlight some of the key aspects that can be scientifically confusing, but I want to make it both understandable and also obtainable. So we're going to look at some definitions and then apply it to food choices. So we're gonna call this clinical nutrition, metabolism, and fasting. So definitely have to start with the definitions. So metabolism. Metabolism is a chemical process, and it's the pathways that allow our macronutrients, the dietary and some self-made carbs, fats, and proteins to be converted to energy. Now, if glucose is around, and glucose can be made by our body or it can be provided by our food choices. If glucose is around, and especially in higher amounts, all of our cells in our body want and prefer to use the glucose as that primary fuel source so that they can carry out their regular activities. However, we have to talk about dietary glucose because we need to define simple sugars, and the simple sugars are a glucose, a fructose, and when they're combined together, they make table sugar, which is sucrose. Then we also have our synthetic high fructose corn syrup. So when we talk about dietary carbs, the ones that are bad and drive up blood sugar and drive up insulin responses and can have this carb bad effect, we're really talking about simple sugars, and those are your monosaccharides and disaccharides, as I had just mentioned here. So glucose, fructose, sucrose, and then sucrose being our table sugar. Dairy is glucose and a galactose, and it can also have some higher metabolic, higher glycemic. However, dairy-free does not necessarily have to be part of a low-carb diet, unless it's ice cream and some of the higher sugar dairy carriers. Okay, so dietary carb, fat, and protein, which we call macronutrients, in excess. So dietary carb, fat, and protein in one meal in excess of our body's energetic immediate demands. We have mechanisms, and all excess macronutrients will be converted to fat. Our body stores it in our adipose, which is our fat tissue. So we have mechanisms where a carbohydrate as glucose, when it's in excess because of a high carb meal, we will use a little bit for energy, we will use a little bit for storage, and then we're going to convert it into fat. And there's a specific pathway that occurs in our liver, and then our liver ships it out in our blood to be delivered to the fat tissues, and then we store it. So when dietary carb, again, I'm highlighting the simple sugars, your table sugar and your baked goods from flours, which are processed starchy food sources, also spike blood sugar as they are digested. So these are the food categories that are bad carbs and cause the problems, especially when they are in excess, as we do see in a lot of our westernized diets. And when these are high, the body, under insulin-driven mechanisms, as I had just mentioned a moment before, stores these sugars as fats. So when the insulin is driving this process to store all this excess energy that the body received from the food that we don't immediately need, that means we're storing fat. That also means we're not breaking down the fat. So, excuse me. So when we have a lower dietary carbohydrate of the simple sugars, your table sugar and your candies and the cakes and the ice creams and your all of your baked goods, the muffins and all of the breads and the pastas, and all of that adds up as the simple sugars with the high glycemic. However, this is not including the category of complex carbs, which are fiber rich. They do not have the same metabolic effect. They do not spike blood sugar because they do not get absorbed. I will be talking about fiber in the next couple minutes. So low dietary carb of eliminating the bad simple sugar food sources, and then including fiber, which is a good thing, even though it's considered a complex carb, that's a good carb, right? So the lower carb intake of the simple sugars and the crap carbohydrates, that makes our body use our own fat instead of glucose. And this is what promotes ketosis. Okay, so low carb takes away the dietary glucose that the body prefers, and it makes the body convert to a different pathway to sustain metabolism, which is using carbs, fats, and proteins to promote and provide energy. So let's talk about ketosis. Ketosis is a metabolic shift away from glucose to fatty acids provided by our own fat tissue being broken down, which releases the stored fatty acids, and then reaching a point where we can use the fatty acids, or once longer time goes by, we will then also begin to use ketone bodies, which are generated from the fatty acids. So we can use low carb dietary strategies of especially eliminating the crap sugars, and that will drive our body away from using glucose into ketosis. And ketosis is when we have shifted away from glucose and we are now burning our fat to get to the fatty acids, which become the fuel source. Now, ketone bodies, aka ketones, and the ketogenic diet are three specific molecules: beta hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. Only the first two, the beta hydroxybutyrate and the acetoacetate, are metabolically functional for using them for energy. Acetone is a volatile gas and we exhale it. A diabetic who has that fruity breath is in a diabetic pathologically bad ketosis, and that is the acetones that you are smelling on their breath, and that's actually a danger sign. So what we also have to appreciate is that the liver is the primary organ who is able to generate ketone bodies from fatty acids, which were delivered by our own fat being broken down, releasing the fatty acids, and then those fatty acids in late fasting are then used by the liver to make the ketone bodies. And these are really what you can consider mobile carriers of energy. Okay. However, it is being in the state of ketosis where our body has shifted away from glucose and is burning primarily our own adipose and using fatty acids in ketone bodies for the metabolic energy. This is a substitute from glucose, which is why we care about this shift away from glucose into fatty acids. It has been demonstrated to have one of the most optimal long-term anti-aging, anti-pain, health-promoting mechanisms when we can get the body off of just sucking up all this excessive glucose and then storing it as fat. We want it to be breaking down. Now, it's also important, as you see it here in purple, the ketone bodies are generated from fatty acids that have been released from our own fat tissue, especially during fasting and low carb dietary strategies. And we can combine those and have a low carb fasting type of dietary strategy as well. And this is primarily driven through the hormone glucagon. So then fasting. If we're going to say that we can achieve ketosis, which is using ketone bodies instead of glucose for our metabolism and our energy, then the term fasting needs to be appropriately defined as well. And that is not consuming food or refraining from eating for a specified amount of time. Because we're removing the dietary carb, fat, and protein sources, it forces the body to use our own fat reserves, which is that stored energy. Remember, high glucose even got converted to fat. So we're going to the storage energy. So we're going to break down fat. We're going to use the fatty acids. So fasting is one way to shift our metabolism into ketosis using fatty acids as the fuel source. Now, early fasted versus late fasted looks very differently metabolically, and this is also really important if we want to be obtaining and reaching ketosis, because it does not happen automatically, and it does not happen the same in all people. I'll mention what that is in just a moment. So we call the meal time typically the 3 hours of food, right? You eat and then up to 3 hours after the meal is called postprandial. After that, so 4 hours and on, we call that post-absorptive, right? Post-absorptive, absorption meaning the food has all been digested and no more food is coming in. So early fasted is approximately 3 to 10 hours after a meal. And very few, and as none and then few, as you go from 3, 5, 8, 9, 10 hours as we would overnight, we would have few ketone bodies. Then we have late fasting, and that is where you start to see 10 plus hours, especially 14 to 18 hours. We have moved completely into having almost all of our energy coming from the ketone bodies. So it takes late fasting to reach ketosis. Now, it's also important to mention that we don't ever not use glucose. Now, most cells in our body can use ketone bodies and fatty acids. There are a few exceptions. The red blood cells cannot use either fatty acids or ketone bodies. Therefore, for all of our red blood cells circulating at every single moment, they can only use glucose. Therefore, even during fasting and ketosis, we still have mechanisms in our body that sustain the generation of blood glucose. We can do that by breaking down liver stored glycogen. However, that is not an endless supply. We can use liver stored glycogen as long as you don't run out of it, and you do run out of it as you reach late fasting. We also will then use a mechanism called gluconeogenesis, gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, genesis meaning we're making it. So we will use our certain amino acids by breaking down our muscle and other body tissues, and we will route that to the liver, and the liver can convert those amino acids into glucose. And that is what we do during early fasting. However, that is at the cost of our skeletal muscle and especially the branch chains that are in the muscle. So glycogen must be depleted by fasting, low carb diets, or both. And low carb meaning simple sugars, the crap carbohydrates, high glycemic load, high glycemic index, but not the fibers, because fiber does not get absorbed, right, in order to make ketone bodies. So glycogen must be depleted by fasting or low carb diets to begin making ketone bodies, which is ketosis. Okay, so now that we have some basic definitions, now we can put this more together in a bigger understanding. So we also want to talk about the hormones that are driving these times of eating fed versus fasted. So insulin and glucagon support them differently. In a well-fed state, especially with higher dietary carbohydrates, especially the simple sugars and the sugar spikes, greater than 75 grams in a meal, not the day, in a meal, will causes the pancreas to release insulin, and it's in a dose response. However, if you have a low carb, right? Remember, we're thinking about simple sugars, the table sugar crap, table sugar, the bad carbs, the simple sugars, right? Glucose, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, and then the sugar-loaded type of foods, candies as such. And remember, baked goods are in that because of the flour, all-purpose flour, and flours in general are processed, and they can be higher glycemic as well. So if we choose a dietary meal that has less of those things, especially under 75 grams in a meal, then we keep the insulin at the lowest basal level, and that's what we want. There's no such thing as technically like no insulin. The insulin has to be at low basal levels. Insulin is important because it pushes nutrients into muscle cells. It moves potassium and minerals around. However, in excess, and if it's prolonged, then we can have the detrimental health effects such as insulin resistance. However, having an optimally healthy carbohydrate choice and low simple sugar carbohydrate meal helps stay at the level that insulin is at basal and not spiking, and that really should be our target. Insulin not only moves nutrients into cells, which is a very good thing, it also promotes energy storage for a future day. So that means we are building fat, and that also means we are not breaking it down. So when insulin is around, we do not and we cannot break it down and burn fat. Okay, that's also the benefit of shifting into that post-absorptive later fasting. So after 3 hours of eating, right, as we go into that early fasted, our metabolism shifts to being driven by the pancreatic hormone glucagon, and this is used to break down fat. Now, the fat, when it's broken down, is our adipose tissue, and it releases the fatty acids. The fatty acids can travel in the blood, and they can be used directly and taken out of the blood by the cells and tissues and be used directly. So fatty acids from fat tissue become the prevalent energy source in that early fasted. However, we have not gotten to the ketone bodies yet. It takes typically 14 to 18 hours, as I had mentioned, as you are entering that late fasted state where the liver glycogen has been depleted, and that switch of that late fasted time period is when we are now having a higher rate of glucagon broken down fat that releases the fatty acids, and then the liver converts the fatty acids into the ketone bodies, and now we are in official nutritional ketosis. So nutritional ketosis is using methods of time-restricted eating, including intermittent fasting and low-carb diets, to obtain ketosis and ketone body-driven metabolism. We also call this the metabolic switch. The metabolic switch is that late fasted when the glycogen has been depleted and the liver starts converting fatty acids from adipose and fat tissue at a much higher rate into the ketone bodies. And what's important is once the person has obtained nutritional ketosis, they are breaking down their own fat for fuel, which is why this is excellent for weight loss and weight management, but it's also a wonderful strategy to keep blood glucose at the regulated level. Nutritional ketosis and the metabolic switch, even though it's low carb or fasted, meaning avoiding food for periods of time, remember, blood glucose is always going to stay at a basic level because we need to supply primarily the brain and the red blood cells, even when the rest of the body can use fatty acids and even into ketone bodies. So we are still sustaining blood glucose levels, but we just want them in an optimal level. So the goal is to get out of hyperglycemia, which drives hyperinsulin. We want regular blood sugar, we want regular insulin, and then we want our body breaking down our own fat so that we're thriving and existing mostly off of our own fat, our fatty acids, which are the source of liver-generated ketone bodies of nutritional ketosis. So a few other things that are that highlight why we really care about this. Early fasted is different than late fasted, as we've already highlighted just a minute ago. So in early fasted, the adipose fat tissue is releasing its stored fatty acids. And those fatty acids I had mentioned are able to enter directly into the cells and the tissues and organs and be immediately converted into energy. And that is important because when the cells receive the fatty acids, it gets broken down and it generates the molecule of energy called acetyl-CoA. So that is the goal of all of this, right? We want our metabolism to be able to get us this energy molecule. And the acetyl-CoA is the energy molecule of glucose. It's the energy molecule and it's fat. And if proteins and amino acids are being used for energy, it is the majority of the end product. A few amino acids make ketones directly, but majority of them also get us to acetyl-CoA. So the fatty acids delivered help the cells directly get the energy molecule. So the other thing that's happening, remember I said we can convert other molecules into glucose. So now that we don't have dietary glucose, in early fasted, we start to break down our own skeletal muscle, especially for its branched chain amino acids. But the proteins that can be broken down, release amino acids, they travel to the liver, and then the liver converts them into glucose. That was our gluconeogenesis pathway. However, that's at the expense of our muscle, and it requires energy because gluconeogenesis is energy thriving. It needs it. It's not making us energy, it's consuming it. So that late fasted, which is when we start to ramp up how much fatty acids are being released, meaning more fat breakdown, meaning more fatty acids being delivered to the liver. This is the process where now the fatty acids are being converted into the ketone bodies. However, this halts the breakdown of the skeletal muscle. So nutritional ketosis and the metabolic switch is actually the mechanism our body uses to increase fatty acids available. However, stop and preserve our skeletal muscle. So the ketone bodies, beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, they are mobile carriers of acetyl-CoA. And where did that acetyl-CoA come from? The acetyl-CoA came from the fatty acids that were released from the adipose fat tissue, delivered to the liver, and then the liver used those fatty acids to get to the acetyl-CoAs, which is what is that's the molecule of energy, and then it stored it as a ketone body so that it can be shipped out into the blood and delivered to the cells. So when the cells during nutritional ketosis receive the ketone body, they convert it right back to the acetyl-CoA. So it's literally a mechanism of us delivering the molecule of energy, which came from the fatty acids. So then, knowing that this is an optimal way to thrive and dietarily and eating patterns, how then do we obtain the metabolic switch and the nutritional ketosis. We can do this with fasting. We can do this with low carb, especially the simple sugars, and we can do a combination. And the combination is my preferred method. This is a healthier, optimal way of having a routine, not a diet, not a fad. This is a lifestyle, a dietary, nutritional lifestyle. And it is optimal for losing weight, maintaining weight, and again, it's anti-aging, it's anti-insulin resistance, it's anti-diabetic, metabolic syndrome, anti-cancer, all of these things, pain, degenerative processes. We know that all of those things are linked to hyperglycemia and insulin resistance. So we want to develop ways that we can obtain nutritional ketosis and the metabolic switch. So there's a couple ways that people can use fasting. And fasting, very importantly, is not starvation. Fasting done appropriately and purposely is going to help us obtain the metabolic switch and nutritional ketosis, but it's not going to cause malnutrition. It is a form of calorie restriction. Okay, so TRE, time restricted eating. And the first one that I always like to highlight is intermittent fasting. Many people have heard of this. So intermittent fasting is going to be a strategy. It's one example and method of time restricted eating. So time restricted eating is when you consume all of the food in a certain window of time and then you fast the remainder. So in the intermittent fasting type of TRE, majority of the food is between a 6 to 8 hour window, and the fasting is done the remainder of the time. Intermittent fasting is my preferred method, especially when it's paired with optimal foods, whole plant-based, whole foods, whole grains, fiber-rich, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes. Legumes are your beans, peas, and lentils, right? Your mix and match, your colorful foods. Now, of course, you can have meat and seafood in there. I'm all aboard. Plant-based eating is not vegetarian. Plant-based eating with optimal foods is simply having more of the plant-based than the meat sources. I think that's very important, especially for amino acids and for people to enjoy culinary cooking and eating. Other types of time-restricted eating can include on and off cycles, and that could be 1 day on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. Different methods are preferred by different people. However, in realm of considering nutrient status, if somebody is trying to quote unquote like detox, I'm very concerned about not having sufficient amino acids and the phytonutrients, antioxidants that we get from our food. Even though it would be coming in the next day, I'm just not a fan of it. If you're going to fast, I recommend strongly doing it for the purpose of obtaining nutritional ketosis, not just saying I didn't eat for 2, 3, 7, or 10 days. Okay, then we have strict ketogenic and we have modified ketogenic. And strict is what we would also call classic keto. This is your high fat, medium protein, and low to very low, and I like to call this fiberless carbohydrate intake with a target of 20 to 50 grams of carbs the whole day. Now, in many of the keto websites and resources, they consider carbs any form of glucose, fructose, and galactose, our 3 simple sugars, right? Simple sugars as monosaccharides and disaccharides, our table sugars and our processed foods and baked goods, those are high glycemic, right? They're bad for everybody. However, classic keto also eliminates starchy vegetables and legumes and beans and fiber foods do not even get absorbed. So I do not like the strict keto. However, if somebody is trying to do a rapid weight loss, strict keto will deliver it faster. However, any longer than 3 weeks can have significant effect on the gut and the bowel habits because of the removal of the fiber. And fiber are non-digestible complex carbs. These are wonderful food groups. They come in lots of colors. They improve satiety. They slow down digestion. They improve blood sugar and blood lipids. They improve healthy gut bacteria, and they provide regular bowel habits. Therefore, my preferred type of keto is called your modified, I say fiber-rich, ketogenic, low carb, low elimination of sugar crap choices. And if you pair that with a Mediterranean style, they have definitely shown health effects from modified ketogenic paired Mediterranean. And then when you throw in the intermittent fasting for nutritional ketosis, that really is a win-win situation. And then my favorite, I might have just already alluded to this, I call this the mix and match. The mix and match of intelligent eating. This is going to be plant-based. I prefer omnivorous, so that is going to include your meats and seafoods, but just eat less of them because you really, really, really need to keep up the amino acids. So important, and it gets missed a lot of times, especially with restrictive diets. Colorful is your mix and match, all of your fruits, your vegetables, your beans, peas, lentils, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And the best way to mix and match this is over weeks and months. It doesn't have to be every single meal. To keep it simpler, mix and match all of these different things within the meal, but colorful mix and match over days, weeks, and months. So then why is there a common theme for fast for 3 days or fast for 7 days? And my approach to that answer is going to go back to the science. If people are not keto adapted and they are still in the early stages of incorporating and learning low carb choices and or fasting time periods of time restricted eating, different people in the beginning release their stored glycogen at different rates. So they have found that early on, some people, it could take 3 and 4 days of low carb and fasted in order to reach the metabolic switch for nutritional ketosis. So somebody who's new and you say fast for 3 days, that could be how long that person takes to get to the nutritional ketosis. Now, if you're already keto adapted, meaning you're intermittent fasted, you have low carb but healthy complex carbs for that modified keto approach, I can share with tracking ketones, which you can do in the urine and you can do with a finger prick. You can actually stay in nutritional ketosis even after your meals. So if you have carb and low simple sugar types of food, right, healthy carbs, natural fruits, and or starchy vegetables that have been prepared with the mixed meal effect, right, half of a serving and use a fat carrier, for example, and having and make sure amino acids, that has been shown to improve and slow down the simple sugar blood spike. So there are definitely ways to still enjoy, but moderation and understanding the good versus the bad sugars and how to use complex carbs and in foods is definitely also part of the strategy. So then I also do get a lot of questions around the benefits of fasting because of the anti-aging effect, right? The very hot topics around cell autophagy. These are the internal cleanup mechanisms, right? So it does not require fasting and starvation to emphasize and promote cell autophagy. We can do that with healthy foods, and I have a few tips coming up here. Healthy foods, eliminating the sugar crap, the high fructose corn syrup, the baked goods with the all-purpose flour, because it's gluten and it's high glycemic, and it basically has absolutely no nutrition. Using the complex carbs for the colorful choices, right? The root vegetables and your beans and peas and lentils, and then achieve ketosis. So again, it's so important to emphasize time-restricted eating and ketogenic dietary approaches are not starvation. They are safe ways of calorie restriction, but without malnutrition. Malnutrition, when you start fasting 3, 4, 7 days, and again, fiberless diets as well, they have negative effects on the gut microbiome, and you're going to start to have the loss of those wonderful healthy nutrients. So we don't want to promote malnutrition just to get to nutritional ketosis when we can do it safely and effectively. So the metabolic switch, which is the nutritional ketosis, is a wonderful goal. It supports weight loss and weight management, optimal blood sugar levels, and it also does promote autophagy. So with it being a hot topic, let's define two very important terms, autophagy and mitophagy. So autophagy is basically when older, metabolically less sufficient cells, and we can call those senescent cells, it's when they start to degrade themselves to recycle their contents. So the body has this self-typed of programming to allow for getting rid of wasteful cells. We use those to make new ones, right? We are constantly turning over. Different body systems turn over at different rates, but we are not the same skin and we are not the same cells that we were born with or even 3 years ago. So autophagy is this programming, and it protects us against wasting energy and also from cell damage, right? Because senescent cells, which are still thriving, they can generate a lot of oxidative stress. So this is a mechanism that our body uses, that the cells program cell death and recycle their contents. So mitophagy is virtually the same thing, but it's when the powerhouse, that mitochondria inside the cell where we make our energy, among lots of other things, the mitochondria also undergoes the same type of cell programmed recycling, and this is called mitophagy, and it's done so through the quality control loop, which is a balance of fission and fusion. So when fission and fusion are not balanced, and one is blobbing off the broken parts so that they can be released and broken down and degraded, while healthy mitochondria fuse together so that they can work together and they grow. So fission, fusion is the growing, expanding, so we're making new mitogenesis, whereas we're breaking down the old ones, right? So it's not phagocytosis, but the mitophagy is the balance. So we can support both autophagy and mitophagy with optimal, plant-based, colorful, nutrient-rich foods. The more colors, the more antioxidants, the more minerals, vitamins, and phytonutrients. And phytonutrients are molecules that are not a vitamin or a mineral, but have very powerful and beneficial effects in our systems and metabolism. And this is also part of how they benefit us. In addition, time-restricted eating, nutritional ketosis obtained by intermittent fasting, has also been shown to promote mitophagy and autophagy. So this is where the mechanism of why the media or the TikToks or whatever it is these days is talking about why fasting helps the cells do their cleanup. So this is some of the science behind it. Now, ways to supplement would be green teas, EGCG, those are your catechins. Your berries and red wine, resveratrol. Foods rich in quercetin, especially onions. Other foods are also rich in quercetin. Then we have our CoQ10. We have PQQ, the pyroquinone. NR is your nicotinamide riboside, and K2 is that beautiful menaquinone. Now, EGCG, resveratrol, and quercetin come in food sources. However, you can get them in higher therapeutic doses in supplements, and whether it comes from food at lower levels or therapeutic treatment doses, they both stimulate Nrf2. We want optimal natural stimulation of Nrf2. We can use it at therapeutically to stimulate it at higher activity levels. However, this is a molecule that is considered a sensor of oxidative stress. And when the Nrf2 molecule, we're going to call this the transcription factor, when it gets activated, its job and its role is to regulate the genes of our genetic code that are responsible for increasing the antioxidant cellular defenses to protect against damage, and also in the liver, it drives the molecules and enzymes that promote the detox pathways. So Nrf2 is a very important molecule. However, increased activity during cancer treatments has been found to protect the cancer cells. So Nrf2 foods are a wonderful way to naturally promote basal levels of Nrf2. However, avoiding a high dose of certain molecules may be optimal until the treatment and the anti-cancer regimens have concluded. So here's another beautiful picture. We also talked about and learned cellular senescence from one of our nutrient search and shares. So cellular senescence is when the cell gets arrested and no longer continues to divide, but just starts consuming nutrients. Cellular senescence is notoriously embedded in mitochondrial dysfunction and is a direct driver of oxidative stress. So what ends up happening is if we have an imbalance, and if you can see that they put the X's, right? If we have impaired pink Parkin, we have less mitophagy. If we have impaired signals of fusion, we have less biogenesis. And when these two systems stop supporting that balance, oxidative stress increases and the cell goes into this arrested cellular senescence. So we now want to reintroduce that family of senolytics. These are agents that have been identified that directly serve to, one, eliminate senescent cells, right? Because what are they doing? They're sucking the system's nutrients and setting up oxidative stress. They're no longer functioning cells. They're just wasting reserves. So we're going to clear them out. I added a couple items here because our senolytics aren't just, I don't think of those just as being able to eliminate senescent cells. These are also the agents that promote optimal quality control loop, as we just introduced. Okay, so also clinical pearls. Clinical pearls on how to manage the body during intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, as well as some ways to promote a senolytics, right? Senolytics are supplements and molecules that help the body rid ourselves of those senescent cells, right? What does that mean? It means it promotes autophagy. So the first thing to recognize is that as healthy and beneficial as ketosis is, every ketone body that the liver drops into the blood is acidic. So it's important to make sure that during the meal times you are eating fruits and vegetables because those are net alkalizing. And then I also like to pair a phytonutrient powder. There's Amazing Grass, there's Emergency, there's Greens First, or any brand that you like that is a powdered form of an antioxidant mix. I like to do a scoop of that, and I also like a hefty teaspoon of a protein powder. We really do need to ensure the liver is getting enough of the amino acids. You know, the amino acids help the gluconeogenesis. It drives our neurotransmitters, our hormones, our transport molecules, and we really need to make sure that we have enough amino acids. So we don't want a meal dose, right? Throw the scoop out. The scoop's too big. However, a teaspoon with some phytogreens in the early morning or mid-morning is an excellent way to promote optimal health and metabolism during that late fasted period. It's also important to incorporate carnitine. Carnitine is a molecule, and it's made by the liver and the kidney, and then those two sources have to make enough to supply to all of the body tissues, and the carnitine molecule ensures that we can use fatty acids for fuel. So early fasting and late fasting are both very important because the carnitine through the carnitine shuttle helps move the fatty acids into the appropriate compartment so that they can be burned and used for energy. The mitochondria is the source, and when the fatty acid is burned for energy, it releases acetyl-CoAs, and then those are our molecule of energy. So I do like to supplement with carnitine during anybody who is starting and or sustaining a nutritional ketosis. B vitamins are especially delivered in a quality multi, cannot go unrecognized. Everybody should be on a quality multi, and you do need to be sure. However, all of the B vitamins can have an increased demand during nutritional ketosis because they power the pathways and the machinery. So B vitamins are additionally very important when it comes to the metabolism of fasting. And then when we want to support the senolytics, we had already mentioned a couple of the agents, the green tea, the EGCG catechins, the resveratrol. However, CoQ10 and PQQ have been shown to directly promote autophagy as well, and they additionally promote optimal energy conversions. Now, when we talk about healthy, we have to also include some clinical pearls for supporting detox, toxins, and elimination. So there are 4 routes of elimination, and elimination is how we get the things that we don't need and want anymore out of our body. So the 4 routes of excretion are urine, feces, sweating, and exhaling. And urine and bowel movements for feces are the 2 primary sources for majority of our toxins. So in order for the liver to eliminate its toxins that it has neutralized, which we are going to call biotransformation pathways, the bile allows the molecules that have been detoxified to be neutralized, made water soluble, and then the bile is the route to push it into the intestines, delivering it to the bowel for feces. So bile is vital when it comes to helping the liver detox from hormones, from chemicals, from toxins, and metabolic wastes that need to be modified. So we support bile with lecithin and taurine because lecithin and taurine are part of the structure of bile, and bile is 3 things. Bile is cholesterol, the molecule, the steroid. It's the cholesterol, the molecule breakdown products called bile acids. And then the bile acids by the liver's biotransformation conjugation pathway, which takes either a glycine or a taurine and binds it to the bile acid, making it more water soluble. So we can use taurine, and then lecithin is the 3rd ingredient. It's a diacylglycerol, and plant-based lecithin can be supplemented. There's soy, there's sunflower. They're easy and inexpensive. So if you want to support bile, which should be done anytime we're trying to promote detoxing and toxins, and hormones qualify in that as well, we recommend, there's other ways of doing this, but my recipe is taurine and lecithin, because not only does that promote bile, they also have other downstream benefits that they benefit of other systems. So you're getting not just bile benefits, but you're getting other things that lecithin and taurine are helpful with. However, there's also a supplement, and that's a spelling error. That should be TUDCA, TUDCA. That is a taurine-bound ursodeoxycholic acid. So it's a pre-made bile acid with a bound taurine. So you can pay more for the TUDCA, which is a wonderful product. It's great for breaking down gallstones, or you can use lecithin and taurine and have a very similar effect with additional benefits, as I had just mentioned. When we're talking about supporting detox, toxins, and elimination, we also have to remember how important regular bowel movements are, because bowel movements and feces is how we get them out of the body. So a diet rich in fiber will promote regular bowel movements, which you should optimally be aiming for at least one per day. And if you are more constipation prone, a safe and effective laxative type is a bedtime magnesium. I prefer magnesium as oxide, aspartate, and citrate. There's a wonderful product by Now Foods called magnesium caplets, or tablets, I think, tabs, magnesium tabs, and it's a wonderful trifecta of those three together. Biotransformation is the term that we use for the multi-step detox pathways, which are how we neutralize and excrete our toxins, our hormones, and chemicals. And the body uses, the liver uses a significant amount of amino acids, and we need B vitamins, and we need sulfur foods. So again, this does bring us right back to making sure that a plant-based omnivorous diet of mix and matched colorful foods and fiber rich for bowel and excretion really does come into play. I will highlight some sulfur foods, and the sulfur foods support the very important process of sulfation. Sulfation is very active not only in the liver, and it's where we extract a sulfur, it has sulfate, and we attach it to something. And not only do we do this readily in the liver, but we use this in many other systems. So if we have low dietary sulfur amino acids as methionine and cysteine, which are primarily in animal-based foods, hence an omnivorous diet. Now again, plant-based omnivorous means that you're eating the meat and the seafood, you're just eating less of it, which is the opposite of what we normally see. More of the plant-based items, but not excluding the meat, right? Your chicken, poultry, turkey, beef, pork, seafood, etc. Lamb is in there as well. So if you have a diet low in methionine and cysteine, you are straining the sulfation pathways, and that has been a source of increased oxidative stress and decreased glutathione, because the cysteine is also a precursor to make our antioxidant glutathione, and cysteine comes from methionine. So we can either eat the foods that are rich in methionine and cysteine, we can supplement with them, and we can use other molecules that protect them by being donors that preserve their chemical breakdown so that they can be used for the sulfation pathways. So we can protect our methionine, cysteine, and glutathione. Not only dietarily do we want to eat them, but we can use MSM That is your methylsulfonyl-methane. That is very commonly advertised in your joint supplements. It is a wonderful sulfur methyl molecule, and it also prevents glutathione from being broken down. Choline and lecithin are also wonderful. Choline is phosphatidylcholine. Phosphatidylcholine is one of the phospholipids in lecithin. So choline and lecithin, either individually or paired, are wonderful. They, in addition, will provide methionine some defense. However, they also have downstream systems. So not only is it great for detox and great for biotransformation, those are wonderful agents that will have downstream beneficial effects. The lecithin and taurine are the same that we just mentioned for bile, so they also, in different pathways, protect and preserve our methionine, cysteine, and glutathione. And then NAC. NAC is your N-acetylcysteine. It's a more readily absorbable form of the cysteine, and it does directly increase the body's natural synthesis of glutathione, and it also can be a Nrf activator. We use it in high doses therapeutically. However, there may be some times where you want to not have a therapeutic dose, and NAC may not always be good, especially if we are using some of the anti-cancer agents. Here's a little bit of guidance on sulfur-rich foods. Again, I'm a big proponent of plant-based omnivorous, so this is an excellent way to justify having mealtime meat and eggs. So your chicken, pork, beef, lamb are also, as I had mentioned, very good. Canned tuna was also, and other seafood was a good array of our cysteine and methionine, our sulfur amino acids, which is what we're really going for, because methionine and cysteine were the primary source. However, other sources of plant-based or non-animal sulfur-rich foods are available, and at the top of that list is the brassica and cruciferous. You can see in this group, we've got arugula, bittercress, bok choy, mustard greens, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. And broccoli sprouts are the richest source also. Cauliflower, collard greens, kale, cabbage, horseradish, radishes, rutabaga, turnips, wasabi, and watercress. Now, these are in the category of goitrogens, meaning in people who have an iodine deficiency and an iodine deficient goiter, they can aggravate the iodine deficiency. However, as long as a person is iodine full, these have not been shown to have a problem. So it's very important to test for sufficient iodine if we are going to be using these in thyroid and or goiter patients. Garlic and onion, ginger and curry are also very high in natural sulfur. Dried fruits are packaged with a sulfur-based type of sulfite. Fermented foods, especially some wines and beers as well, can be rich in sulfite as a dietary sulfur. And then, as I had mentioned, nuts, we've got almonds and peanuts, and I believe there is several other nuts, cashews included, that are also good. And some mineral waters, they do get to be a little bit expensive, but there is an Italian, I think it's Pellegrini, that is rich in mineral water. Even though we mentioned sulfur and sulfur foods regarding the sulfation mechanism, very important for biotransformation pathways, but also vital in a lot of other pathways, especially joints and collagen, for example, digestion of some of our food sources. However, Another benefit of the Brassica cruciferous family of vegetables, which are very rich in sulfur, is one of their special sulfur phytonutrients, and that is called the glucosinolate. It's a family of sulfur phytonutrients, and when these vegetables containing the glucosinolates, when they're chopped, chewed, or diced, uh, processed raw, if you will, it releases an important molecule called myrosinase, and the myrosinase converts the glucosinolate into a powerhouse sulfur phytonutrient called sulforaphane. So if you prepare by dicing and chopping these vegetables, it will form as sulforaphane in raw. If we chew them, the chewing mechanism does this. However, heat will destroy it. So if you are going to be taking advantage of these food groups for the sulforaphane, which promotes excellent liver biotransformation and protective mechanisms, preparing them is absolutely vital. And regarding best options for cooking, if you can eat them raw or al dente, optimally steaming, ensuring they keep their bright color. Those are the best ways to ensure that the glucosinolates and the sulforaphane are intact. Another family of very beneficial sulfur phytonutrients that also comes from the glucosinolate in a different pathway inside the body is our indoles, and they're really important for steering some of our hormone pathway as we neutralize them. So wonderful properties. However, I just wanted to highlight here again that the goitrogenic brassica foods in large quantities in an iodine deficient person can aggravate the iodine deficiency and goiter. So we do recommend to test iodine levels if somebody already has a goiter, and to ensure that the thyroid is being monitored. However, with an outright iodine deficient goiter, these foods do need to be avoided until the iodine is replenished. And an excellent thing about the cruciferous and brassica foods as well is that we had mentioned stimulating Nrf2. So if we want to use foods as a natural lower dose type of Nrf stimulation, promoting optimal enzyme and optimal conjugations, we can do that without high dose supplementation. So some of the Nrf2 stimulators include this wonderful sulfur-rich family of the cruciferous and brassicas. So we just talked about ways to eat and prepare those vegetables. And again, mix and match. There's a lot of different options. So work these into recipes and ingredients over weeks and months. It doesn't have to be every single meal all the time. So don't try to overcomplicate it, but work these in over time. Then we have our turmeric and curcumin. We have quercetin, resveratrol, the catechins from the green tea, which we had also mentioned for Nrf2 stimulation and for supporting a senescent cell autophagy and mitophagy. And then we also have garlic, which is that wonderful allicin family, and some of the alpha lipoic acid. So here are some examples of foods that contain these wonderful properties. Turmeric you can cook with, you can season with. However, turmeric is and curcumin are safe in higher doses for anti-inflammatory pathways, and are wonderful in 500 or more milligrams as a supplement. Berries and red wine, wonderful properties. Our green tea has that high base of the catechins. Garlic is wonderful for not just Nrf2, but it's great for blood vessels. It's anti-inflammatory. It lowers total cholesterol, lipoproteins, and it raises HDL. Lots of wonderful properties. Dark chocolate loaded with flavonoids onions, especially the red onion, rich in quercetin. And then the allium from yellow onion can also be included as well. It already moved. Okay, we are diving into some of the, I'm going to stop that. Okay, we are diving into more nutrient review. A lot of this is probably going to be familiar. However, it's vital when we're talking about, right, nutrient therapies. As we learned last week in our first approach, that functional nutrition, functional medicine, and lifestyle medicine, very big emphasis on a dietary approach, but there's all other things in there, and we're going to be definitely starting as we go through systems to be including, modifiable factors as well as supplementation, botanicals, and nutrients. However, at the core of nutrient therapy needs to be the overall metabolism and food choices as well as pairing. So I'm sure you won't be surprised when you hear me remind you that my dietary recommended approach is the best of the best and mix and match. And that's all of the intelligent eating components as well as mix and match all of the best components of the named diets and fads, and we want to get out of a dietary fad approach, but mix and match is also all of the colors and textures, right? So we really want to be taking into account all of the goods and eliminating all of the bads. I think that it's important to keep in mind that the patients, when we are talking about dietary changes, it can be really overwhelming. So if we want somebody to eat better, we can't just say a blanket statement, eat better. We have to teach them what that means, right? So TRE is our time restricted eating, and my recommended approach of that intelligent intelligent eating is whole food, colorful, mix and match, plant-based, omnivore if I can talk people into it, right? I do definitely recommend an omnivorous approach, but with a plant-based foundation. And then that is less meat or poultry, animal based. However, at each meal or at least over the day, make sure that the plant-based portions are in greater quantity. That's how we want to really view plant-based. We want to make sure that our patients don't have the stigma or the misunderstanding that plant-based means vegan or vegetarian. It does not. However, we do want to ensure that the plant-based portions, fruits, vegetables, legumes as our fibers, being beans, lentils, and peas, and then nuts and seeds, and our RS is our resistant starches. And we want to cook with as many fresh and dried herbs as possible, because herbs have their own nutrient value. They have many of them have the polyphenolic rings, which we learned are metabolizable by our gut bacteria. So it serves as not only a phytonutrient source, it also can have a fiber component. So when we mix and match all of these items, it doesn't have to be so strict at every meal. Have our patients try to incorporate the mix and match, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, colors, and then different protein sources over weeks and months, right? So hopefully that kind of dims down the stress of how to begin changing. We also want to have a low carb but high fiber, and I'll be talking more about glycemic index and load in this presentation. We also want to be taking into account some of the better alternative sugars, the low glycemic, and some are even no glycemic. want to avoid our high fructose corn syrup and processed and ultra processed foods because they deliver virtually nothing and the nutrients aren't there. They spike insulin, they spike glucose, so we want to kind of avoid that. And then we also will revisit the migrating motor complex, right? That is not eating 2 hours before bed, and that is also taking advantage of eating a meal and then having hours in between the next meal. That also promotes that motilin and that migrating motor complex, which is the clearing and sweeping motions of the intestines, and you lose that very important function if you graze and snack all day. So we want to be taking advantage in those last 2 bullet points. Don't graze 2 hours before bed. That's taking advantage, and that's a patient education of how to incorporate and utilize the migrating motor complex. We also want to get away from fads, right? Do some of them have good qualities? Yes, absolutely. But if you follow only a strict keto, or if you follow only a carnivore, or if you have some of these other fad named diets, even paleo, there are wonderful components, but each one has a gap of nutrients that are healthy and beneficial, whether it's colorful fibers or protein. So we want to be able to take advantage of. Okay, just a few supplemental informational slides. I'm going to briefly highlight them. Beautiful article that defines a time-restricted eating, as we had said, is preserving fasting hours and eating hours typically within 6 to 8 hours. There are a couple of different examples of time-restricted eating. The calorie restriction within the intermittent fasting is my favorite, and then there's alternate days and periodic fastings as well. We also mentioned, just wanted to really highlight dietary carbs. So when you look at some of the ketogenic diet websites and fads, when they say go low carb, they're talking every carb, and simple sugars and processed foods and all-purpose flour and the high glycemic foods are really what we want to be eliminating. However, complex carbs are starchy vegetables and non-digestible fiber foods. So using the resistant starch method, we can turn a high glycemic food into a fiber-like low glycemic by cooking and fully cooling potatoes and rice, and I have a slide for that coming up. So also on this is some of the explanation regarding that mixed meal effect. The mixed meal effect is where we're going to use the starchy fibers, the starchy carbohydrates, right? Your root vegetables, for example, squash and rutabaga and carrots, wonderful tasty food choices. They come in different colors. Every time you have a different color, you have a different phytonutrient, and those are eliminated in strict keto, classic keto. So having a smaller serving and then using a fat carrier such as butter, ghee, olive oil, coconut oil, cottage cheese, sour cream, but get full fat, and then amino acids, has a wonderful benefit of decreasing the sugar spike, and can be an excellent way to include the modified ketogenic type of dietary approach, which is better for your gut but still allows you to stay in nutritional ketosis. So it's the sugar and the crap and the flour and the nutrient-less foods which are the bad carbs that we would really want to be eliminating. Fiber has to also be highlighted, and fiber as beans, peas, and lentils are your complex carbs. However, plant-based sources of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, they also are wonderful sources of fiber. Remember, fiber is a non-digestible carbohydrate. And these are not things we want to eliminate. They're things we actually want to incorporate. So whole skin on, for example, so a cooked and cooled potato with skin on would be absolutely excellent. It serves as a fiber, but it has to be fully cooked and fully cooled. And then this is also where I like to highlight the mix and match, right? It's not possible to eat all of these foods, fruits and vegetables and grains every meal, but over weeks and months, alter up the ingredients and come up with different recipes and use different ones at different times. That gives you the long-term benefit, and you're getting all of the goods. So the fiber-like resistant starch is different than your fiber food. Your fiber foods are the complex carbs of the non-digestible strings of the carbohydrates, simple sugars. So because they're non-digestible, they stay in our gut, not being absorbed as the simple sugars. They're metabolized by the gut bacteria, and they also help form stool. So they help on the gut very, very, very importantly. So fiber-like resistant starch is taking a high glycemic food like fresh cooked rice and hot fresh cooked potato. When you fully cook it and then you fully cool it, the structure changes during the cooling, and it makes the simple sugars harder to be reached by the enzymes that break them down. So this acts fiber-like. Fiber-like meaning these are not absorbed. They will not therefore have the same impact of spiking sugar, and they stay in the gut and they feed the gut bacteria, which is what we want. So the mixed meal effect of your fiber-like resistant starches and your starchy vegetables can be improved even further with that fat carrier and ensuring an amino acid as protein source with it. And then further highlighting a mix and match and your fat carriers. So you have your whole grains, right? You have the whole grains have fiber in the outer bran layers, and then they have nutrients in the inner germ. So when you eat the whole grain, you're getting all of those layers, and they're wonderful ways to incorporate vitamins, nutrients, and fiber. A couple examples are corn, quinoa, rice, and wild rice. Now, of course, we want to cook and cool the rice. Amaranth, millet, and buckwheat are wonderful options, and those are also gluten-free grains. However, these can also be milled and processed, and you can have gluten-free flours as well. But if you're using it as a flour, it is going to have a little bit of a higher sugar spike. And then the resistant starch, we talked about the cooked and cool rice and potato. You can reheat it. If you reheat it, it loses some of the fiber-like properties, but it still is going to be significantly less. So a small serving would be reasonable to still include in a modified keto. Other resistant starches, if you needed and wanted to increase fiber, you can use the flours, and the flour is unlike the high glycemic baking all-purpose flour. These are fiber flours, and they can be used as thickeners, or you can add them to smoothies or soups as long as you don't boil them. They can't be cooked because that will change the property. If you are new to grains, this is my favorite website. They have the Whole Grains 101 if you needed to learn about them. And then their recipes page is absolutely outstanding to learn how to cook with these whole grains. So final notes on carbohydrates. We want to include the healthy complex carbs and get rid of the sugar and the crap. We want to use that mixed meal effect, and we want to use our resistant starch cooking and cooling method and the mixed meal effect. And going low glycemic and optimal blood sugar is great for weight loss and great for lowering oxidative stress. There's also dietary fats, right? And as you shift into a ketogenic type of approach, you are incorporating a higher fat diet, dietary choices, excuse me. So it's important to recognize that dietary fat does not equal make you fat. Excessive sugar, which gets converted into the fat storage molecule, is what adds adipose and obesity and pro insulin resistance and weight gain and oxidative stress. So we can use dietary fats, right? We have wonderful choices for oil. Our olive oil is very rich in the Mediterranean diet. There are other plant-based oils. Some plant-based oils are higher in omega-6. However, omega-6 is not bad. It's only bad when it's in high levels as a Western diet. However, small levels of avocado oil and cotton oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil in low levels, as like tossed on a salad or a little bit on a saute, delivers omega-6, which is a essential fatty acid. It's just in excess when it becomes bad. So ensuring optimal types of oils and then enjoying different types of animal lard. You can have enjoying the dark meat, for example, from chicken. Eating the skin on, I am okay with as long as it's paired with a plant-based diet. Because the plant-based diet delivers the antioxidants and the vitamins and the minerals, which combat any oxidative stress. So enjoying small portions of meat, fat, or plant oils is definitely an excellent way to use flavors and enjoy, again, the culinary side of why we eat. Whole grains are also, or eating a whole foods diet is going to include the whole grains, as we said, nuts, seeds, and then learning to work through some of the resistant starches and fibers, as we had highlighted. The Mediterranean and ketogenic diets are explained here. It's important that they are better together, and instead of just following a fad, I think it's much better to just take all of the positives from all of the named meals and pair them together. It lowers the stress of trying to shop and cook. However, mix and match and enjoy all of the good things. However, it has been shown that the Mediterranean diet, rich in fruits and vegetables, rich in whole grains and beans, legumes, lots of olive oil, fresh fish, and it does include wine in moderation, of course. Red wine has that resveratrol. However, it does recommend limiting refined grains, which are your all-purpose flours and baked goods. It avoids the sugary foods. I think I've mentioned that enough without having to highlight it too much more. And then they do recommend low consumption of red meat. I am not in agreement with that unless it needs to be. Red meat has the highest form of absorbable dietary heme iron, much more so than plant-based. However, there's been a lot of studies that red meat can cause people to develop high levels of TMAO. However, that is more related to a gut dysbiosis problem. So red meat is not, it needs to be in moderation. However, if you're going towards a plant-based diet, small healthy amounts are optimal. A westernized diet where you're eating a 50-pound porterhouse with a baked potato and 5 pieces of bread obviously is a bad choice. food pyramids for the Mediterranean diet for you. The strict keto, why I don't like it, because you're eliminating fiber-rich and nutrient colors of root vegetables, and I don't think that's necessary. And again, just confirming that the ketosis is acidic and it changes the gut microbiome if you go fiberless. So it's definitely valuable to consider doing the modified keto and pairing it with the Mediterranean type of cooking. And then the best of the best. So putting it all together is really the best way, right? That colorful, plant-based mix and match. I prefer omnivorous, just eat less meat than you do eat less meat than the rest of your plate for plant-based choices. And then the more colorful, the higher the phytonutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, and those are very rich in antioxidant promoting foods. They're anti-inflammatory and they promote fiber, including healthy bowel, healthy blood sugar, and healthy lipids, and oxidative stress.